I can blame Lockheed if I want to, but I don't know what caused it. So, anyway, most civilized people become deaf, or partly deaf as they get older. Uncivilized people have two advantages over civilized. Number one, their teeth don't start decaying because they don't eat as much sugar. And number two, their hearing remains just as good even if they live to be 100. Their hearing stays as good as it was when they were young. This is one of the traits of uncivilized people because they don't listen to a whole lot of loud music, or work at a factory where the machinery makes a lot of loud noise, or mow their yard where the lawnmower makes a bigger noise than it should, or a bigger noise than the human ear should be exposed to. You have to learn how to wear earplugs at some point, folk. All right, now, got about 15 minutes. I want to go over a few things that you might see on the test. And again, I talked to a teacher one time who, when he made up his tests, some of them were white, some were yellow, and he told the students, now these yellow ones are different from the white ones, but actually they were the same. But he figured the student never figured that out. I figure out if I do something like that. But anyway, the tests are really different. But now I think you know it. If you compare yours with your neighbors, anybody else, you know that my tests really are different. And that some of you see certain questions, some of you see different set of questions. And even the ones that are alike, I mean, you're going to see even and odd at the top of the page, but the odd ones, some are jumbled and some are not, and the even ones, they're jumbled too. So it's like there's 4 different test banks I'm giving out. I'm going to hand grade them, so I won't have to worry about a scantron. But anyway, all right, one thing I haven't mentioned was a disease called typhus, otherwise known as typhoid fever. In 1926, my grandma Cunningham died of typhoid fever just shortly before her 28th birthday. Really sad. Typhus used to take away a lot of people. It's an unknown disease anymore. We've got to get vaccinated against it still. As far as I know, we do. Now, I know my children all had all their recommended shots. And when I joined the Army, I mean, I was vaccinated against the same diseases I had been vaccinated against when I went to school, including smallpox. See, I had a smallpox vaccination when I was 5. I had another one when I was 30. We now know that these vaccinations do not last a lifetime like we once thought. So anyway, typhus was a disease spread from Europe to the Indians that the Indians had no resistance to. Now, something else that some of you will see on the test about the Vikings. This has to do with the Indians. The Vikings were from Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. They crossed the Atlantic in the year 1000. They first went to Iceland, then some of them went farther west into Greenland, and then some of them went to Nova Scotia. In Greenland, they met the Eskimos. They looked on the Eskimos as being devils, so they called them Skrælings. And they wouldn't have anything to do with it. This was sad because, all right, in the year 1000, the northern hemisphere was as hot as a firecracker. We know it was hotter than it is now because I mean, you might think these summers get hot, but we had species of grapes that will now not grow any farther north than the state of New Jersey that used to grow all the way up in Nova Scotia. And species of plants and animals, well, they farmed in Greenland. The Vikings farmed the same way they had farmed in Norway. Then came the Ice Age again. There came a cooling, the same cooling that caused the Black Death in Europe, and it completely killed every European living in Greenland. If the Europeans had only made friends with the Eskimos knew how to handle that. But the Europeans wouldn't have anything to do with the Eskimos, so all Europeans died. The last ones that died in their bed with nobody to bury them. 200 years later, when the Norwegians came back, they found a few Europeans in their beds, nothing but bones left. That nobody had been around to bury. But the Vikings came and they met the Indians. Now, they had a belief among them that if you meet some people who don't look like you, if you can scratch them and they'll bleed, you're human. If you scratch them and don't bleed, they're demons. So when an Indian walked into the Viking city there in Nova Scotia, just off the coast of Canada, Then he walked into camp. They did not understand his language. The Vikings cut him. He bled. So they assumed he was human. The problem with that was that Indian went out, collected a whole lot of his buddies. The Vikings were hopelessly outnumbered. The Vikings were able to stay around for 10 years, then they packed up and went back to Greenland. Again, they had little chance against the Indians, but now 500 years later, you have something different. 500 years later, the Spanish came, and this time the kings were involved. The most powerful king in Europe was the king of Spain, and the Indians did not stand. By this time, 500 years later, the Vikings did not have cannon. They did not have gunpowder. They did not have rifles. They did have iron and steel swords and helmets, but they were no match for the Indians because they were hopelessly outnumbered. But in the 500 years between the Vikings and Columbus, it is now known that European fishermen would cross the Atlantic and fish off of North American waters. You might say, well, why didn't they? Keep in mind, there were no telephones, so you had a coastal fishing village that generally was isolated from other villages nearby. And this coastal fishing village would send out its ships on a long, long trip across the Atlantic and return maybe 6 months later with a whole lot of dried up fish that they somehow managed to preserve. But in the meantime, they would stop off and intermingle with the American Indians a little bit, and they spread their diseases, smallpox and typhus, among the American Indians. And it's greatly reduced the Indian population to where, by the time the English came in the early 1600s, the Indians were so reduced in numbers that the white man could handle. And as for the Spanish, they came in droves. Columbus only had 3 ships for his second trip. Had 17 ships, every one of them equipped with cannon and gunpowder, and the men were equipped with rifles. And the rest, they say, is history. All right. Oh yes, just looking at notes, something I overlooked about Africa. Matriarchy. Basically what this means is women were in charge. A matriarchy is a society where it is ruled by a woman, and a lot of your African societies are matriarchies.